Okay, welcome everyone. Tonight, we are going to continue learning about Pesach. And what I want to do tonight is, some of you have my Pesach Haggadah companion, and it's called Paradigm, Process, and Paradox. And so what I want to do is, I want to take something from all three of those P's. I kept it with P for Pesach: paradigm, process, paradox. So we're going to do two paradigms, we're going to do two processes, and two paradoxes. And this really fits into our overall series of fundamentals of Kabbalah and Chassidut. We've mentioned many times that despite the fact that obviously Kabbalah is dealing with esoteric mysteries and secrets and mystical and spiritual, it's quite organized. The paradigms, the models, the processes that it uses in which to give over the information. We've been learning for months through the Sfirot, through the names of God. And so here we're doing the same thing with Pesach. Last week, for those who watched or watched later, we did it through numbers. If you remember, we took the numbers 4, 5, 15, and 50, and we saw how the whole Haggadah was structured around these numbers, and these numbers served as a context in which the whole process unfolds. So, like I said, we're going to do two paradigms, two processes, and two paradoxes. But before we start, I do want to mention that today, I think many people know, is around the world, what would have been the Lubavitcher Rebbe's 120th birthday is being observed, celebrated, remembered around the world. He was born on the 11th day of Nisan, Yud Aleph Nisan, and he would have been 120 years today. And of course, the standard blessing that we give each other is Ad Mea Ve'esrin. You should have good health until 120. Why 120? Because that's how long Moshe lived. That's how long, according to tradition, Rabbi Akiva lived. And so it became an example of how long we should have strength in this world. So everyone knows the incredible influence the Lubavitcher Rebbe had on Judaism and the whole world, and it's just growing daily. There's so many stories about Chabad in the Ukraine, like hanging in there. Just quite amazing that I lost track of how many countries, something like 80, 90 countries. Every state of the United States, virtually every campus, almost every suburb now has a Chabad. So it's all on the strength of the vision of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. So I just want to bless Chabad to go from strength to strength. Okay, so our first paradigm is what I call the birth paradigm. And we're actually going to see 6 different versions of one paradigm. And this is a very important fundamental principle, is that depending on the context, depending on the relativity of what is being discussed, you could have one paradigm that plays itself out in many different ways, and it doesn't contradict the other paradigms in the same set, as it were. So we're going to go through very quickly, though, 6 different birth scenarios or paradigms that relate to Pesach. We know that the whole month of Nisan is all about Hitchadshut, renewal, rejuvenation. It's springtime. All of nature is coming back to life. And the Torah mentions 3 different times that Pesach must be in the spring, because in the spring we came out of Egypt. And so Pesach and spring and rejuvenation, like they're intertwined, they're synonymous. So the idea of a birth paradigm with Pesach is just, it's like a natural flow of understanding the energy of this month. So the first one is we're going to take the creation as a birth paradigm. And again, I have to go through almost everything tonight fairly quickly to be able to give the whole picture. Each one of these paradigms we could delve into very, very deeply. But creation itself is called a birth paradigm. The Tzimtzum, the contraction that the Ari taught about how God had to contract his infinite being in order to make place for a world, and then into the empty space, the vacuum, a kav of light, a line of light enters in, and worlds are created. And then it follows that the initial world, or the world before us, there were many, many worlds. According to the Talmud, 974 worlds before this world. And in the last world, there was what's called Shvirat HaKelim, the breaking of the vessels. And that this world, Olam HaTikun, is a result, is constituted from the broken shards or vessels of the previous world. And that's why it's called the world of rectification. So how can we relate this to birth, and how can we relate this to Pesach? So this is the birth of the world. And so our being in Egypt, this was like a tzimtzum. In other words, if someone is free and you take away their freedom and they become a slave, well, this is, in human terms, this is like the ultimate of tzimtzum, of contraction. A person's free will is quite limited. They're not in charge of their time or anything. So slavery is like a tzimtzum. When we come out of Egypt, this is like the ray of light. The birth of the nation is compared to the kav that enters into the empty space. And we go to Sinai and we receive the Torah, and the lights are so great that the whole people did not have the vessels really to contain this once in a history revelation. And what followed was the golden calf and Moshe breaking the tablets. That was the Shvirat HaKelim. So here we see the whole creation cosmology is compared to a birthing process. And our going down into Egypt and the slavery and coming to freedom, receiving the Torah, but not really having the vessels is like Shvirat HaKelim. And then after that, the 40 years in the desert and then entering into Eretz Yisrael is like the world of rectification. Now we're going to take the birth paradigm and see it in a different way. And here is that the 10 plagues is compared to the birth pangs that a woman goes through when she is giving birth. And in fact, when a woman gives birth, the the process is called contractions. This is tzimtzum. This is what's happening. And so when we come out of Egypt, this is like the birth pangs. The 10 plagues are like the birth pangs. And our coming out of Egypt, the night after the 10th plague, is like the birth of the nation. And but this process continues until we get to the Red Sea. And the Red Sea, we know that when a woman gives birth, she cannot give birth until what's called the breaking of the waters. Her embryonic fluids has to break in order for the final process of birth to happen. So here, the plagues are the birth pangs, including the killing of the firstborn. And our coming out of Egypt to the 7th day of Pesach is like beginning to come through the birth canal. When the sea opens up, this is quite literally what's called crowning. When the head comes out and the whole baby comes out of the birth canal. This is like crossing the sea. And when we get to the other side of the sea, this is the birth of the nation. So this is also just a very, very powerful image of the crossing of the Red Sea is the people coming through the birth canal to be born as a nation. Now we're going to take that same idea, the birth pangs of the plagues, but this time the birth happens as we leave Egypt. When we get to the Red Sea, the birth has already happened. What happens if it's a male child? On the 8th day is circumcision. So when we cross the sea, to do the circumcision, the foreskin has to be, in a sense, pulled and clamped and then cut off. So our going through the sea and the Egyptians drowning in the sea is like the foreskin being cut off. That going through the sea is like a circumcision. And then the birth process continues. So that's another birth paradigm. Now another one, now we're going to, in a sense, stretch time. And we're going to look at it a bit differently. And here is the 40 years in the desert is compared to the 40 weeks of pregnancy. There's exactly 40 weeks of pregnancy. And so the 40 years in the desert, even though we came out of Egypt, but in a certain way, like the expression, it's easier to take Israel out of Egypt than to take Egypt out of Israel. And so it was a 40-day process until we came into the Holy Land. And how did we come into the Holy Land? It was very similar to the splitting of the sea. The Jordan, we could read this in the book of Yehoshua. The Jordan split and the people went through. And so after 40 years or 40 weeks of pregnancy, when we cross through the Jordan River and come into the Holy Land, that constitutes the birth of the nation. Now, like I said before, these are very, in a sense, different paradigms, but they all share the same idea of birth being connected to Pesach in the month of Nisan. And the last one we'll look at is the broadest perspective, where all of history, in a sense, is a period of gestation. And the birth is only going to happen at the time of the Messianic era. That it's as if all of humanity is waiting to give birth to a new state of consciousness, which once it happens, will be like a total new birth. So here we went through, I believe, 6 different paradigms of birth, each one a little bit different, but they're all connected to Pesach. We could see that they're all true, and the images and the paradigm works on all the different levels. So one of the fundamentals of Chassidut, maybe the fundamental, is whatever we learn. Right, I see that in the chat, someone just said that it's called the birth pangs of the Mashiach. Literally, Chevlei HaMashiach, the birth pangs. So this last paradigm that entering into the Messianic age will be like a birth. It will be, maybe call it a rebirth, but it will feel like a whole new reality, a whole new state of consciousness. So one of the fundamentals is whatever we learn, we have to personalize it. And so this whole idea of a birth paradigm in the month of Nisan and Pesach is there to teach us about our possibility of being reborn in this month, of our possibility to give birth to new perspectives, new insight, new dedication, new ideas, new like New Year's resolutions. Nisan is it's a new year of the months. And so what we just learned needs to be, of course, internalized and integrated, and to know that this is the energy of the month. The energy is there for the taking. And so we all should take advantage of the newness in the air, in nature, and the holiday itself is all about newness. Okay, so that was our first paradigm. The next one happens to be one of my favorites. And I learned the basis of what I'm going to give over maybe 30 years ago. But every Seder, along with many other insights, this always sticks in my mind as the framework of how to experience the Seder. Now, one of our earliest mini series was about time. We did time and then we did space. And one of the ideas of time is the idea that there is linear time. There's 4 different types of experiencing time. They're all true and they're all happening at the same time. One is linear, one is circular, one is spiral, and one is divine time, where divine time is the ability to experience past, present, and future simultaneously, something that the mind has a hard time to grasp. But on Seder night, what I'm about to explain, there is a paradigm, I call it the pan-historic paradigm, where we go through the past of Jewish history, the present, and the future, all in the Seder. And when we go through the 15 steps, we're going to do it fairly quickly, but as we go through the 15 steps of the Seder, we're actually experiencing past, present, and future. And it's actually linear, because the 15 stages of the Seder go from the past into the future. So I'll explain now. The first 3 steps of the Seder, Kadesh, Urchatz, and Karpas, all of them in this paradigm, remember, every paradigm is different and doesn't contradict other paradigms. In the book, the Haggadah Companion, I present many paradigms of how to understand the 15 steps. This is just one of them. So in this paradigm, Kadesh, Urchatz, and Karpas all represent Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. Kadesh means sanctification, to be holy. Urchatz has to do with water and purity. And Karpas has to do with taking a green vegetable and dipping it. And so in this paradigm, the idea of holiness and purity and greenery reminds us of the Garden of Eden. This is the collective unconscious of all humanity. We all come from Adam and Eve. And so deep in our consciousness, there is this experience, this utopian experience called the Garden of Eden. The fourth step of the Seder, which we are going to look at deeper towards the end of this class, is the breaking of the middle matzah. So that is, in this paradigm, we'll see it symbolizes many, many things, but in this paradigm, it represents Adam and Eve leaving the Garden of Eden. The Garden of, that was a pun, the Garden of Eating. They had to leave because they ate from the Eitz Hadat Tov V'Ra. That was I guess what you call a Freudian slip. So, but that is a breaking of the vessels. That utopia is a lot of energy and light to be able to contain. And they didn't succeed in being successful in integrating a utopian existence. And they're leaving the garden was like the breaking of the vessels. The fifth step of the Haggadah is called Magid, from the same root as Haggadah, which means to tell the story. So then when we look in the Haggadah, it begins telling the story from Abraham. And it goes through all of Jewish history. It starts with Avram and it goes to Yitzchak and then Yaakov and the 12 tribes, and then going down to Egypt and the whole slavery and coming out. So it's the longest part of the Seder, Magid, the fifth part. We actually learned about that last week. We learned about the number 5. This is the fifth step. But this is like going through all of, not just Jewish history, it's all world history, because we see the first exile was from the Garden of Eden. That was not particularly a Jewish exile, it was a human exile that we all experienced deep in our consciousness. And so we go through the whole past. Towards the end of Magid, we reenact the 10 plagues. We reenact actually coming out of Egypt. And the fifth part ends with beginning Hallel. For those who are here at the beginning, we played a song from Hallel. Well, this is the second time already. We said it already in synagogue before the Seder, and now we're saying Hallel again. But here we have another unusual thing. We don't sing the whole Hallel. We just sing the first 2 parts. And we end with a blessing that God redeems Israel. So according to this pan-historic paradigm, this represents Mashiach coming. Not just the redemption from Egypt 3,300 years ago, but this represents Mashiach coming. And then we wash our hands, we eat the matzah. Say there are two different blessings, motzi, matzah. Then we eat the moror, and then we make a sandwich of the moror and the matzah. That whole part is what we call transition. In other words, to go from the world like it is now to the Messianic era is a process. There's different versions how long that process will take. Some versions are the Messianic era will not be that long relatively. Others is like 1,000 years, but it's a transition. The Rambam explains it's not like, snap your fingers and like everything is different. It will be a transition into a world of peace and harmony and a new consciousness and God revelation and a new way to understand the Torah, but it will take its time. So the washing of the hands is like going to a mikvah. It's like we're entering into the Messianic era. We just said the blessing that God redeems Israel. And now we're remembering the past, like eating the bitter herbs, the moror, and we're making a sandwich because it's important to know, even once we're redeemed, where we're coming from. And then we go into the meal. And it's like the meal of the year. And according to tradition, when Mashiach comes, there'll be what's called the Feast of Leviathan. Leviathan are these, I don't even know how to say it, these mystical sea creatures that, according to the Midrash, that God pickled them for this feast that will take place in the future. And so this feast is like Mashiach is here. It's like that kind of a feast. And this whole part of the Seder is the consciousness. We mentioned the Rabbi, and the last years of his life, he was saying over and over again, he was saying, open your eyes, Mashiach is here. And what he was trying to say is that the future is here now. The Messianic era is here now. We have to start living it. We have to start raising our consciousness to make it happen, not to wait for Mashiach to come and then we'll have a elevation of consciousness. We need to start having that elevation of consciousness now, and that's what will bring Mashiach. So that's what's happening in the Seder, is we're at the meal, and it's like we're celebrating Mashiach coming. At the end of the Seder, at the end of the meal, so that's Safun, that's where the children usually bring the missing half of the matzah that we broke in Yachatz, in the fourth step. And this represents that all of this, everything that was hidden will now be revealed. That represents, we're told that Mashiach will come and reveal ta'amei mitzvot, the reasons for the mitzvot. But more than that, the reasons for everything. So that's Safun. Safun means hidden. So the matzah is brought, and that represents a continuation of the Messianic era. But now everything is being revealed. Everything that was hidden is being revealed. And then we say Barech, that is the blessing after the meal. And at the end of Birkat Hamazon, after the blessing after the meal, it's the same of any holiday, but there's one insertion that's very, very important, and it's Harachaman it's one of the, they're called harachamans, where we're appealing to the mercy of God. And we say that God bless us with a day that is all good, that is all long, a day that tzaddikim yoshvim atorehem beroshehem v'nehanim meziv hashachina. We're longing for a day, and it's a long day. It's a long day that that the tzaddikim are sitting with crowns not on their heads, in their heads. So this is what's called keter in the Sphira, but the keter, like the key, is not sitting on the head anymore. It's been totally integrated, and they're sitting in bliss in the presence of the Shekhinah. And then at the end we say, would it be that our portion is with them? So this is one of my favorite parts of the Seder, this one little insert, because what it's saying is that here we're now getting, in a sense, beyond the Messianic era. We are sitting in and getting pleasure from being in the presence of the Shekhinah. So just the concept is like, wow, like that will be our consciousness. Our consciousness will be that what used to be our supraconscious will become our regular consciousness. And that will allow us to be what's called devekut, to cling to the presence of God at all times. After this, then we do what's called the Great Hallel. So it's the regular Hallel, but there are additions to it at the end. And that's why it's called the Great Hallel. It's only done once a year, Seder night. And what we add to it is at the end, we add from Shabbat prayers. So what's the significance of this? So every Shabbat, we ask God for a time that will be Shekulo Shabbat, Umenucha L'chaye Olamim, that all of reality will turn into Shabbat. So at the end of Hallel, we're now in this consciousness, it's Kulo Shabbos. All of reality is now Shabbosdik. It's like, wow. And then we end the Seder, but it's become very, very traditional to sing a series of songs after the Seder. It's not technically part of the Seder. We've finished the 15 steps, and we sing these songs. The last song is called Khadgadya, the little goat. And this is, it's almost like a children's rhyme, but what it's describing is all of Jewish history. The goat is eaten by the cat, and then the dog eats the cat, and then the rod hits the dog, and then the fire burns the rod, and the water puts out the fire, and the cow comes and drinks the water, and the slaughterer comes and slaughters the cow, and the angel of death comes and slaughters the slaughterer. And the last thing is that the HaKadosh Baruch Hu comes and slaughters the angel of death. That's how we end the entire Seder. So what is this? This is Techiyat HaMeitim. This is what's called the resurrection of the dead. But this comes from a verse in Isaiah where it says that in the future, God will take death away, and he will take all of the tears from all of the faces. But the idea is, if we go back to the beginning of the Seder, the idea of being in the Garden of Eden, in a state of utopia, where we're told that had we not eaten from the Eitz Hadat Tov V'Ra, there wouldn't have been death in the first place. And here, we're told that in the future, we will actually reach a level where death will be removed. And that brings us to the world to come. And for that, there's another verse that says, and no eye has seen what is promised to those who wait for God. And so the Talmud says that with all of the prophecies of the great prophets, they only prophesied about the Messianic era. None of them prophesied about the world to come, because it's beyond our concept. We have a tradition that there will be such a thing, but to try to describe it is somewhat beyond our present consciousness. So just to put that all together, this is the idea that the whole Seder we're reliving not just the slavery in Egypt and the redemption and the exodus from Egypt, but here in this paradigm, we start in the Garden of Eden. We go through all of the exiles, and we're told that when we go through Magid, it's not just the exile and slavery in Egypt that we're remembering. We're remembering the Crusades, we're remembering the pogroms, we're remembering the expulsions, the Inquisition, the Holocaust. We're experiencing all of that. And then we get to redemption, and then we get to the Feast of Leviathan, and then all of the hidden things are revealed, and then we sit in the bliss of being in the presence of the Shekhinah, and ultimately we experience the resurrection of the dead and entering into the world to come. So this whole Torah I saw originally in a book called Likutei Halachot from Rabbi Natan. Rabbi Natan was the primary student of Rabbi Nachman of Breslov. And he wrote many different books. That's where I originally saw this paradigm. I added a few things here and there, but from the time I read it, that, like I say, I might have many other ideas at the Seder, but in the Seder we say, Chayav Adam lirot et atzmo ki'ilu yatsa miMitzrayim. A person is obligated to see themselves as if they personally came out of Egypt. So this idea is in the Haggadah itself, that we're supposed to relive, not just tell the story. And according to Kabbalah, it's not as if we were there. We were all there, because the souls today are reincarnated from these same soul roots that were there. And that's why we're told that every Jew that would ever be born stood at Mount Sinai. And the soul of every future convert was also at Sinai. So this is deep in our collective consciousness. But here, this paradigm goes even beyond that to, like what the Rabbi said, open your eyes. Mashiach is here. So during the Seder, we're actually have this opportunity to experience the Messianic era and a day that is all Shabbos, sitting in the presence of the Shekhinah. And like we have to like really try to internalize it, really try to internalize it. I'll share with you just this last Shabbos. I had such an amazing experience that I've taught numerous times over the years this idea that Shabbos is 1/60th of the world to come. And some Shabbos I actually try to meditate on that, sometimes other things, but this past Shabbos morning, I came out in the morning and the sun is shining and it's very quiet and the birds are singing. And at this time of year, the everything is in bloom. And I stood there and I wasn't consciously trying to think this. It just like, this must be like the world to come. It lasted for 10 seconds, 20 seconds, but it was real. It was so real. It was like, wow, this must be like the world to come. So I'm only saying that, not in any way to make something big of myself, but encouraging ourselves that that's what's happening in the Seder. The Khadgadya is crafted in a way to help us experience, in a sense, the future, not just the past. That's what it says, Chayav Adam lirot et atzmo ki'ilu yetza Mitzrayim. We're obligated to see ourselves as if we came out of Egypt. That's like this. That's like the bottom line of what we're supposed to experience in the Khadgadya. But this paradigm that we just gave over is also a chance to experience the future. And that is it's just an amazing thing. Okay. Now we're going to do very quickly 2 processes. Those were the 2 paradigms I wanted to give over, the birth paradigm and the pan-historic paradigm. Now we're going to do fairly quickly 2 processes. There are many, many more. But one we've talked about already, and that is that there is a process happening with 3 full moons. The first full moon was Tu B'Shvat. The second full moon was Purim. And the third is Pesach. And it's not a coincidence that you have 3 holidays on 3 full moons in a row. They're all connected. So what's happening is on Tu B'Shvat, every year on Tu B'Shvat, we read the Parsha B'Shalach, either right before Tu B'Shvat or right after. And in B'Shalach, that's when we come out of Egypt. And so we're told that the tradition that the sap begins to run in the tree on Tu B'Shvat is the beginning of the energy that leads to Pesach. Because that's the Parsha we're reading. And we actually, on B'Shalach, that's when we cross the Reed Sea. That's when we sing the song. And so there's a process starting in Tu B'Shvat. Every Tu B'Shvat, when I sit at the Seder, I'm aware that this is the sap is beginning to run. The sap of redemption, of spring, of newness is beginning to run. It increases in power during Purim, and then, in a sense, reaches its culmination in Pesach. So that's the idea of a process. The other one is, and this is, Rav Ginsburg teaches this in almost everything he teaches, a teaching from the Baal Shem Tov, that in every process, there are 3 steps called in Hebrew, Hachna'ah, Havdalah, and Hamtakah. The original teaching was from the Baal Shem Tov, but Rav Ginsburg has explained this process in hundreds of different ways. So what is it in English? Hakna'ah means submission. Havdalah means separation. Hamtakah means sweetening. Submission, separation, and sweetening. An example, very simple, that we go through all the time. And he said, and the Baal Shem says, every process that a person goes through from small to large follows these steps. So what is submission? Anytime a person wants to accomplish anything, it could be a 10-minute task, it could be a 10-year task. Someone who wants to be a doctor is going to go through 10 years of schooling and residency until they're a doctor. Some people have even longer missions. So the first thing of submission means submitting to the task at hand. If we don't apply our will, and if we don't really want to accomplish this, we probably won't. It's only if we submit our will to accomplishing this. Separation means once I'm decided that I want to accomplish something, then everything I do, I have to weigh, is this bringing me closer to my goal, or is this going to take me farther away? We have to make a separation between those things that will help me succeed and those things will become an impediment. And then sweetening means that when we get to the goal, the getting there is what we want, we still want. In other words, a lot of times we set a goal for ourselves and we get there and we say to ourselves, it's not what I thought it would be. I mean, I put all of this work into X, Y, or Z thinking that it would do this for me. I see it didn't. So that's the opposite of sweetening. That's like bitterness. Sweetening is that I accomplish it. I'm able to be happy about it. I'm able to thank God for it. I can even have a certain amount of pride in it. And that's called sweetening. So let's apply it to Pesach. So and I'm applying it to back then and now. Back then is the submission was the slavery. It's not that we chose that in a sense. In a sense, God chose that for us. We entered into a state of slavery and we were submissive to that state. But the 10 plagues came as a separation. In fact, if you read the text around a number of the different plagues, the text says that this plague showed the difference between what was happening for the Egyptians and what was happening for Israel during the plague. There was a separation being made. And then when we come literally out of Egypt, the separation is made. We leave Egypt. And then the Hamtaka is to come to Har Sinai and to receive the Torah at Sinai. But let's now apply it to our experience of getting ready for Pesach. So from the time of Purim to the time of Pesach, there's a month. And many people spend the entire month maybe not doing all the time, but it's always on people's mind. When am I going to do the bedroom? When am I going to clean this? When am I going to buy that? Who are we inviting? When am I going to do sponge gadola? When are we going to turn over the kitchen? When are we going to bring in the Pesach kelim? The whole month is preparing for, and it's a lot of work. Everyone knows that it is a lot of work. So we have to submit ourselves to the halacha. We're not supposed to make ourselves crazy, but we do anyways. But you don't have to. You could do it with joy. It's possible. It's really possible. But that's submission. That's hachna'ah. The havdalah is when we search for the chametz, which will happen this year Thursday night. And the next day, we burn the chametz. And by, let's say, 11 o'clock in the morning, no more chametz. That's it. We've made a clear separate. We spent an entire month getting ready to make this separation. We make a separation. Now chametz is done, and now we're in Pesach. And of course, the hamtaka is the holiday itself, is to be joyous and to say to ourselves, yes, it was worth all the work. It was worth all the work. So that's an example of a process as applied to Pesach back then and Pesach today. Now we're going to do two paradoxes. One I'm going to do very, very quickly because the last one will take a little bit of time. And that is the ritual that we do. Pesach night is called the Seder. Seder literally means order. And we have an order. We have 15 steps, and we do them in order. That's why it's called the Seder. And of course, from a few of the things I described, there's great meaning to the order of doing it in this order. But the amazing paradox is that there is no day or night that is more out of order than Seder night. And I'm going to give you some of the examples. In other words, everything we're doing is not the usual order that we do things. So first of all, we drink 4 cups of wine. No time of the year do you make 4 blessings on the wine at the same meal, at the same time. You make 1 blessing and that's it. We make 4 different blessings on the wine. So it's a different Seder. When we wash hands the first time, we don't make a blessing. That's like, what are we doing? And even when we look halachically, why are we washing our hands before we eat the karpas? It's because at the time of the temple, if someone would dip a vegetable into a liquid, they could contact impurity. And so we wash our hands first, but we don't keep those halachas anymore. They don't apply today. And yet every Seder, it's as if the temple is here and we're living out a halacha from 2,000 years ago. When we make the blessing on the matzah, so every Shabbos or holiday, we make it on 2 loaves of bread. So we would expect that when we make the blessing on the matzah, we would have 2 whole matzahs. But what happens is because we broke the middle matzah and we hid 1 away, so we have 2.5 matzahs. And the whole Seder on the plate is 2.5 matzahs. Then we come to 2 steps, motzi, matzah. We say the bracha on hamotzi over 2.5. And then though we make on matzah on 1.5. See, only the time of the year that we would make a blessing before eating bread or matzah, and not 2 matzahs, only 1.5. Now, each of these things has great meaning. Then we have, obviously, we have the 4 questions. And the whole thing is, why is this night different? Why is everything we're doing different than the way we usually do things? So I'm just pointing out, there are more things. There are more things. But here we call it the Seder, but it's really, in Hebrew, it's called Seder. It's the opposite of Seder. And so I'm going to explain to you, according to the Arizal, why is it called the Seder? So the Arizal explains that the way that the world operates, the way the world is created and it runs is through cause and effect. Cause and effect, not just spiritually, but scientifically. There's causes and there's effects. And the way God operates in the spiritual world is the same. So the Ari explains, though, the meaning of Pesach. What does Pesach literally mean? Pesach means to leap over. We call it in English, and it's a good translation, we call it Passover. Because God passed over the houses that had the blood on the doorposts and the lintels. So that's why it's called in English Passover, and it's called Pesach. But Pesach is more than just like passively passing over. It's much more active. It's like leaping. So the Ari explains that what happens on Seder night, and I bless all of us to experience this, and I'm sure many of you know what I'm talking about. There is such an awesome light on Pesach. There's such awesome energy. And the Ari explains what's happening is that on Pesach night, God does not go according to the usual Seder of how light comes into the world. Light has to go through many gradations, many levels until it reaches this world. Or like the Sfirot, there is a hierarchy. The Ari explains that on Pesach night, God leaps over all of the usual order of how light comes into the world, and he just like bombards us with light. And that's why one of the songs at the end of Pesach says that Pesach night is Hu lo yom v'lo laila. It's like, it's not day and it's not night. It's like something else is happening. Something else is happening. And the time, I mean, I feel it the whole Seder, but especially now, many people, right before we do Hallel, open the door for Elijah the prophet. But many Chassidim, we learned this from Reb Shlomo, go outside, as it were, to greet Eliyahu Navi, to greet Mashiach. And you go outside and the moon, it's like sometimes it's 2 o'clock in the morning, sometimes later, the moon is like shining, and it's like Zelo Yom, Zelo Laila. It's like there's some other light happening here. So that's how the Ari explains that there is a Seder, but there is something about that everything is happening differently. That's the 4 questions. Why on this night we do it this way, and every other night we do it differently. So that's the idea of paradox. It's quite paradoxical. Now, the last one we're going to do is about yachatz. And I wish I had more time, but yachatz is the 4th step. That's when we break the middle matzah. And the obvious symbolism of this is that you have the upper matzah and the lower matzah, and the middle one gets broken. So that's like saying, going back to our pan-historic paradigm, that in the beginning, in the Garden of Eden, it was all whole. And when we get to Mashiach, it will be whole again. All of history in between is broken. And so all exile, all national historic brokenness, and of course personal, because everything, again, that's one of the with a capital T, fundamentals of Chassidut, is to apply everything to ourselves personally. So the breaking of that matzah also is our own experience of brokenness. And this also has to do with what's called the covenant of the pieces. This is when God makes a covenant with Avram, and he tells him to take animals and to prepare them for an offering. And he cut into pieces and laid in a line. And you'll have to read it. It's in Parshat Lech Lecha in Genesis. It's called the Covenant of the Pieces. It is incredibly symbolic. If you read Rashi, every word of this covenant is prophetic about what would happen to the Jewish people in the future. And that's where God says that your children, your progeny will go down to slavery for 4 generations, and then I will bring you out. And the whole prophetic history of the Jewish people is revealed in this covenant. But it's called the covenant of the pieces, because Avram cut these animals and laid them in a line, and then this burning torch goes through them. In our next in the after class, I'll try to relay a story about this, but that has to do with the breaking of the middle matzah. So what's the and according to Rav Ginsburg, it's more the tzimtzum. So what's the paradox? The paradox is that breaking, shvira takelim, the word shever has 2 different meanings. When Yaakov saw that there was a famine and he sent his sons to Egypt, he said, I see their shever b'Mitzrayim. And the simple understanding is he wasn't saying, I see brokenness in Egypt, but we're told that he was having unclear prophecy. He saw there would be a great breaking in Egypt. But shever here means grain, food, sustenance. And that's why Yosef is called the mashbir, from the word shever. So here you have, and this happens in many, many words in Hebrew. The same word in a certain way means the opposite meanings. Here it means broken, and here it means sustenance. And so it's explained when we talk about Shvirat HaKelim. The question is, what? God couldn't get it right? 974 worlds, and each one he destroyed? How do we understand this? Or even just the Olam HaTohu, like God doesn't know how to create worlds. There has to be breaking. So the metaphor that's given over is a tree. A tree in the fall sheds its leaves. Whatever fruit is left on the tree eventually will fall off. And it goes into the ground. And that becomes the nutrients for future growth. we're also told scientifically, we're told that our universe, and that's in a metaphorical way, how we can understand the idea of 974 worlds. We're told that life on Earth could have happened because of stars exploding in different galaxies, and the elements that were created by the explosion and the death, the destruction of certain stars, is what created the possibility of life. So here we see that shever means brokenness, but it means also sustenance. And actually, in Hebrew, it's almost like in English. We say something is terribly good, the English. Well, terribly means terrible. So why are you saying something is terribly good? It doesn't make sense. But in that context, terribly means wonderfully, which is the opposite meaning that it usually is. In Hebrew, to break brokenness, you can use the word shever to break brokenness. So I remember, I think it was 3 years ago, I was with my family, and we came to Yachatz, and it popped into my head. I didn't prepare this, but I have to say that I've always had a fondness for Leonard Cohen and his music and his poetry. And so it's become very, very famous. It's quoted everywhere. He says like this, it's one of his songs is called, oh boy. I forgot the name of the song. I'm sorry, it will come to me. But the stanza is, ring the bells that still can ring. Forget your perfect offering. There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. And he actually repeats it. That's how the light gets in. That's the refrain, the whole song. And I remember as I was about to do Yachatz, I remembered this, and my whole family started singing this. And so now every time I do Yachatz, because it's a profound idea. I'm going to say it again. Ring the bells that still can ring. Forget your perfect offering. There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. So that's the paradox of Yachatz. Yachatz, on one hand, is the breaking of the vessels, is exile and pogroms and Holocaust and the whole thing. And on our personal level also, trials and tribulations and we all know it. But on the other hand, all of it has, like Nachum of Gamzu says, Gamzu Latova. This is also for the good. As Rabbi Akiva is being tortured to death, he sees this as an opportunity to fulfill a mitzvah that he's been waiting to fulfill his whole life. It's a high level of consciousness, but that's the paradox of Yachatz. It's actually the whole paradox, the paradox of the whole Seder, all of history and all of existence is wrapped up in the step called Yachatz. So with that, we're going to give a blessing to everyone that this should be a joyous, meaningful, inspirational Pesach for everyone. And as every year goes by, the anticipation and the longing for Mashiach just grows. Thank you. Yehudit Yael just put Anthem. It's called Anthem. Anyone can go to Google and look up Anthem, and there's a great video that goes with the words. Anyways, everyone should have a joyous, wonderful, meaningful Pesach, and God willing, we should get at least one step closer, if not the full redemption that we all long for so much.